Marilyn Monroe was more than a star. She was America's dream. But dreams can turn into nightmares. Fame devoured her, love abandoned her, and in the end, the world found her lifeless at just 36. Was it despair? Or was she silenced to protect the most powerful men in America? Before she was Marilyn Monroe, she was Norma Jean Mortensen, a little girl born into chaos. Her mother, Gladys, struggled with severe mental illness, drifting in and out of institutions. Her father was absent, nothing more than a shadow she would spend her life searching for. From her first breath, Norma Jean was unwanted, a child shuffled from one foster home to another, always carrying the weight of being disposable. At just 7 years old, she was sent to an orphanage, where rows of metal beds and cold hallways replaced the warmth of family. Other children had visitors on weekends. Norma Jean often sat alone, watching doors that never opened for her. She longed for love, but what she found instead was neglect, and in some cases, abuse that left invisible scars she would never fully heal. These early wounds carved into her soul a deep fear of abandonment, a desperate hunger for affection that later made her so magnetic and so tragically vulnerable. Long before the cameras ever loved her, Norma Jean was already learning to smile through pain, to mask the loneliness that haunted her even as a child. Life in the orphanage was not a temporary chapter, it was a revolving door of uncertainty. Norma Jean moved between foster families, each stay marked by the same pattern: a smile of welcome at first, followed by indifference, and then another abrupt goodbye. She was never anyone's priority, only a responsibility to be managed until the next handoff. In the homes of strangers, she sometimes experienced fleeting moments of warmth, like a borrowed book or a kind word at the dinner table, but these moments vanished as quickly as they appeared. She would often pack her small bag again, clutching it like an anchor, as she was sent away once more. To a child, it felt like rejection after rejection, a brutal lesson that she was never truly wanted. Norma Jean's innocence was further tested when she encountered predatory behavior in some of these homes, experiences she later hinted at but could never fully speak of. Instead, she buried her pain under silence, teaching herself to endure by dreaming of a different world, one where she could be loved for who she was. These years of instability hardened her spirit but also deepened her need for attention. Every time she looked in the mirror, she imagined a version of herself that people could not turn away from. This seed, planted in the loneliness of foster homes, would one day blossom into the dazzling, unforgettable image of Marilyn Monroe. But for now, she was just a little girl praying that someone, somewhere, might finally choose her and never let go. By the time Norma Jean was 16, she had already lived a lifetime of instability. Her foster mother prepared to move away, and the system threatened to send her back to the orphanage. For a girl who had known nothing but abandonment, the thought of returning to those cold walls felt unbearable. With no parents to protect her and no home to call her own, she made a desperate choice: marriage. In June 1942, she wed James Doherty, a 21-year-old neighbor, not out of love, but survival. He was steady, dependable, and represented a way out of the endless cycle of foster homes. To the world, it looked like a young romance, but in truth, it was a pact, a teenage girl clinging to the only lifeline she saw. The marriage offered temporary stability. Norma Jean learned to cook, clean, and play the role of a dutiful wife. Yet beneath the surface, she was restless. At 16, she had traded her childhood for domesticity, watching her dreams of freedom shrink into the walls of a small, modest home. When James enlisted in the Merchant Marines and went overseas, she was left alone once again, the familiar shadow of abandonment creeping back into her life. It was during this time, working in a wartime factory to support herself, that her life took a turn she could never have predicted. A photographer's camera found her, and for the first time, someone looked at Norma Jean not as a burden to be passed along, but as someone worth capturing, worth remembering. This moment would ignite the transformation that turned a lonely foster child into one of the most recognizable faces in history. The wartime factory where Norma Jean worked was loud, monotonous, and suffocating, but it also held the door to destiny. In 1944, while she was spraying airplane parts with fire retardant, a military photographer spotted her and asked to take her picture for morale-boosting magazine spreads. The camera loved her instantly. Her luminous skin, playful smile, and the vulnerability in her eyes made her stand out from the assembly line of women. Soon, modeling agencies came calling. Norma Jean bleached her hair platinum blonde, and almost overnight, the girl who once drifted from foster home to foster home became a sought-after pin-up model. Her images filled magazines, her figure adorned posters carried by soldiers into war. She radiated allure, but behind every pose was a young woman astonished that, after years of invisibility, the world suddenly couldn't stop looking at her. But modeling was just the beginning. Studio scouts saw potential beyond the camera stills. She began screen tests, walking onto sound stages that felt like another universe compared to the orphanage beds she once knew. Though she was raw and untrained, she had something the industry craved: vulnerability wrapped in glamour, innocence mixed with seduction. This was Hollywood during its golden age, a machine that could turn a girl into a goddess or destroy her trying. Norma Jean was eager, determined, and willing to mold herself into whatever they asked. She didn't yet realize the price of that transformation, or how much of herself she would have to sacrifice. For now, she was simply stepping into the glare of a spotlight that would change her life forever. Hollywood didn't just discover Norma Jean, it remade her. The studios believed that a new life required a new name, something luminous enough to shine on a marquee. So Norma Jean Mortensen became Marilyn Monroe, Marilyn after a Broadway starlet, and Monroe after her mother's maiden name. The reinvention was complete on paper, but inside, the frightened foster child still lingered. Her hair was bleached even lighter, her walk was coached to sway like a siren, and her voice was softened into a breathy whisper that would become her trademark. Each adjustment erased a little more of Norma Jean and polished Marilyn into being. The industry didn't just market her beauty, it manufactured it, turning her into a fantasy that millions of people would crave. As her career advanced, small roles in films gave way to bigger parts, and audiences began to take notice. She wasn't the best-trained actress, but she had something more powerful: presence. The camera adored her. In every close-up, she shimmered with a blend of innocence and seduction that no one could look away from. Yet behind the transformation, Marilyn wrestled with a quiet ache. Each time she signed her new name on a contract or publicity photo, she felt a little further from the girl she once was. The Hollywood machine promised her immortality, but it also demanded that she bury Norma Jean in order for Marilyn Monroe to live. And so, step by step, she became the woman the world would worship, the blonde bombshell, the sex symbol, the dream. But it was a dream stitched together from illusion, one that came with a devastating price. By the early 1952, Marilyn Monroe was no longer just another hopeful actress, she was Hollywood's crown jewel. Every film premiere became a frenzy, with photographers fighting for a single frame of her dazzling smile. Crowds gathered on sidewalks just to glimpse her stepping out of a car, and studio executives knew that placing her name on a poster meant instant box office gold. Movies like Gentlemen Prefer, Blondes, and How to Marry a Millionaire cemented her image as the ultimate bombshell. In one unforgettable scene, she sang, "Diamonds are a girl's best friend," wrapped in pink satin and dripping with jewels, an image so iconic it would be copied for decades. Marilyn wasn't simply performing, she was defining a cultural fantasy of beauty, charm, and desire. But her fame wasn't confined to the silver screen. She became the face of countless magazines, the inspiration for fashion trends, and the most photographed woman in the world. To soldiers overseas, she was a morale-boosting dream pinned above their bunks. To ordinary women, she was both an unattainable standard and a symbol of power wrapped in femininity. To men, she was the embodiment of seduction. Yet the higher she climbed, the more she felt the walls closing in. Fame had made her immortal, but it had also trapped her in a persona that left little room for the fragile Norma Jean inside. Directors dismissed her as just another dumb blonde, while she yearned to prove she could be more than the caricature Hollywood had built. At the very peak of her success, Marilyn was worshipped by millions but still starved for the one thing she had never known: to be loved simply as herself. For every spotlight that adored her, Marilyn paid a price in shadows. Hollywood had built her into a flawless fantasy, but in doing so, it stripped away her humanity. Directors demanded endless retakes, mocking her for lateness when she froze with stage fright. Studio bosses dictated every aspect of her life: her weight, her wardrobe, her interviews, until she barely recognized the girl who once dreamed of being seen. She was typecast as the dumb blonde, a role she despised. When she tried to negotiate for more serious parts, executives laughed, insisting audiences only wanted the laughing seductress in the tight dress. Marilyn studied acting under Lee Strasberg, desperate to be taken seriously. But the more she fought for respect, the more Hollywood tightened its grip on her image. Off-screen, the demands were crushing. Her schedule left no room for rest, pushing her toward pills to sleep, pills to wake, pills to keep the mask in place. Every public appearance was another performance, her famous smile painted over exhaustion and fear. Inside, Norma Jean longed for tenderness, for a voice that told her she was enough without the cameras. Even her relationships suffered under the glare of fame. Friends betrayed her secrets to tabloids. Lovers were drawn to the fantasy but unprepared for the fragile woman behind it. Each betrayal confirmed her deepest childhood wound, that she was easy to use, easy to leave. The more the world adored Marilyn Monroe, the further Norma Jean disappeared. And though she stood at the center of the dream factory, she was more isolated than ever, paying for her stardom with pieces of her soul. In 1954, Marilyn Monroe stunned the world by marrying Joe DiMaggio, the legendary New York Yankees slugger. To the public, it looked like a fairy tale union, the most famous baseball player of his time and the most desired actress in Hollywood. They were America's golden couple. Their photographs splashed across newspapers, as if destiny itself had written their love story. At first, Marilyn was enchanted. Joe was calm, protective, and offered her a stability she had never known. For a woman whose life had been defined by abandonment, his devotion felt like a safe harbor. He wanted to shield her from the chaos of Hollywood, to give her a private world where she could finally rest. But that desire for protection soon curdled into control. Joe hated the public exposure that came with Marilyn's career. He despised the way men stared at her on the street and the way producers dressed her for the screen. His jealousy boiled into rage, especially when she filmed The 7-Year Itch in New York, and thousands gathered to watch her famous skirt billow over a subway grate. That iconic image, adored by the world, humiliated him. Behind closed doors, their relationship grew volatile. Arguments erupted into shouting, and Marilyn, already fragile, felt trapped between the woman the world demanded and the wife Joe wanted her to be. She longed for a partner who could accept both Marilyn Monroe, the star, and Norma Jean, the vulnerable woman beneath. Joe wanted only the latter, but the cameras never allowed her to disappear. After just 9 months, Marilyn filed for divorce, citing mental cruelty. To the outside world, it was shocking, but to those who knew her, it was another heartbreak in a life already littered with them. Joe would never truly let go, and his love, complicated, possessive, enduring, would follow her long after their marriage ended. Not long after her turbulent marriage to Joe DiMaggio, Marilyn found herself drawn to someone very different: playwright Arthur Miller, the intellectual giant of American theater. To Marilyn, Miller represented everything she felt she lacked: stability, intellect, and a kind of respectability she craved after years of being dismissed as a dumb blonde. When they married in 1956, the press labeled it the union of the egghead and the hourglass, a pairing of brains and beauty that fascinated the world. For Marilyn, this marriage felt like a second chance. She admired Miller's intellect and believed that, in him, she had finally found a man who could see past the glittering facade to the vulnerable soul within. She dreamed of being not just a starlet on his arm, but his muse, his partner in art and life. For a time, she blossomed under his affection, convincing herself that love had finally given her the safety she had always sought. But reality soon intruded. Miller, though brilliant, was often distant, lost in his writing. He viewed Marilyn's insecurities as exhausting, even embarrassing. In her darkest moments, she discovered a diary entry where he confessed disappointment in her, admitting he felt ashamed of her fragility. That betrayal cut her deeply. It confirmed her greatest fear, that even the man she thought understood her saw her as inadequate. Their marriage was also haunted by tragedy. In 1957, Marilyn suffered a heartbreaking miscarriage, followed by another the next year. Her longing for motherhood was crushed, intensifying her dependence on pills and alcohol to numb the grief. Instead of being her anchor, Miller began to withdraw further, focusing on his career while she spiraled in despair. By 1961, their marriage was in ruins. The woman who had once hoped to find salvation in Arthur Miller was left even more broken, burdened with the knowledge that love, no matter how promising, always seemed to slip away. It was another devastating chapter in a life where intimacy had always been fleeting, and loneliness inescapable. On screen, Marilyn Monroe shimmered like a goddess. The applause was deafening, the lights blinding, the adoration overwhelming. Yet when the cameras stopped rolling and the stage doors closed, silence swallowed her whole. Beneath the glamour, Marilyn lived with a profound loneliness that not even fame, fortune, or lovers could erase. She often confessed to friends that she felt like two people trapped in one body: the glittering Marilyn the world demanded, and Norma Jean, the abandoned child who still longed for unconditional love. The greater her fame, the deeper the divide became. At Hollywood parties, she dazzled with her laughter, but behind the mask, her eyes revealed the truth. She was surrounded by hundreds, yet belonged to no one. Marilyn's vulnerability made her magnetic, but it also made her an easy target for exploitation. Directors dismissed her intellect, lovers betrayed her trust, and so-called friends leaked her private struggles to the tabloids. Each betrayal tightened the grip of her oldest wound, that she was never enough to be truly kept, truly loved. Even the men who adored her were captivated by an illusion. They worshipped the starlet in the sparkling gown, but few cared to sit with Norma Jean in her quietest, most fragile moments. And when the lights went out, she often returned to empty hotel rooms, where the silence was louder than any applause. To soothe that aching void, she reached for pills and alcohol, desperate for something to quiet the noise in her head. Yet the loneliness only grew. Fame had made her the most visible woman in the world, but it had also left her invisible in the ways that mattered most. As the years passed, Marilyn's inner turmoil deepened under the crushing weight of fame. Hollywood demanded perfection at every turn: memorize lines flawlessly, look radiant no matter how exhausted, embody the fantasy millions expected her to be. For a woman already battling lifelong insecurities, the pressure was unbearable. Each film set became a battlefield, where she fought crippling stage fright, endless retakes, and the scorn of directors who mocked her lateness or fragility. To keep functioning, she turned increasingly to pills, barbiturates to help her sleep, stimulants to keep her awake, and tranquilizers to calm the storm in between. Doctors, publicists, and handlers supplied her prescriptions like candy, and soon she could not face a day without them. Her body became dependent, her mind foggy, and yet she still clung to the fragile hope that maybe tomorrow she would feel whole again. The studio system only fueled the cycle. When Marilyn faltered, instead of offering compassion, executives tightened control. They scheduled grueling shoots, ignored her pleas for rest, and branded her as difficult. Gossip columns painted her as unstable, feeding the public's appetite for scandal while ignoring the human cost. Alone in her dressing room, she often cried herself into exhaustion before stepping back out with a smile so convincing the audience never suspected. Her closest friends noticed the change. Marilyn, once full of shy laughter and warm vulnerability, began drifting into a haze of drowsiness. her conversations trailing off mid-sentence. She longed for stability, but found herself chained to the very substances that were supposed to save her. Pills dulled the pain, but they also stole pieces of her light, one small fragment at a time. By the late 1952nd, she was no longer just battling the wounds of her past, she was fighting for her sanity, trapped in a silent war between the woman she wanted to be and the addiction that kept her from ever finding peace. By the early 1962nd, the cracks in Marilyn's carefully constructed image were no longer possible to hide. Once the studio's golden girl, she had become a liability in their eyes. Film productions that once revolved around her glamour now stalled under the weight of her absences, her lateness, and her growing dependence on pills. What had once been dismissed as quirks of a fragile star now became ammunition for producers eager to move on to fresher faces. On the set of Let's Make Love in 1960, her struggles were painfully visible. Scenes that should have taken hours dragged into days, as Marilyn forgot lines or arrived too groggy to perform. Her co-stars complained, directors lost patience, and whispers spread that her star was fading. Instead of empathy, Hollywood responded with cruelty, reducing her to tabloid fodder. Headlines mocked her as unstable, unreliable, and past her prime, while ignoring the deep wounds that drove her erratic behavior. Even her boldest attempts to reclaim control backfired. She formed her own production company to prove she was more than the studio's puppet, and for a time it seemed she might reinvent herself. But Hollywood's appetite was fickle. Younger actresses were waiting in the wings, ready to replace her, and Marilyn found herself fighting to stay relevant in an industry that had once worshipped her. The blow came hardest during Something's Got to Give in 1962. Meant to be her grand comeback, it instead became a symbol of her decline. Repeated delays and absences, some caused by illness, others by her dependence on medication, frustrated the studio so much that she was fired mid-production. For Marilyn, it was devastating. To be cast aside so coldly confirmed what she had always feared. She was only valuable to Hollywood as long as she sparkled, and now they no longer cared. Once at the top of the world, she now found herself branded a failure, abandoned by the very system that had built her. Her career was crumbling, and with it, the last fragments of stability in her life. With her career unraveling and her personal life in ruins, Marilyn Monroe slipped deeper into the grip of depression. The world saw a glamorous icon losing her shine, but inside she was reliving the same nightmare she had known since childhood: abandonment. Every rejection by Hollywood executives, every failed romance, every friend who betrayed her echoed the same wound that she was never truly wanted. Her nights became long vigils of insomnia, where she lay awake staring at the ceiling, memories flooding back. She recalled the orphanages, the revolving doors of foster homes, the empty weekends when no one came to visit her. The feelings of being disposable that haunted her as a child now returned with cruel intensity. The pills that once numbed her pain only sharpened the isolation, pulling her into darker places she could not escape. She confided to those closest to her that she felt like she was losing herself. At parties, she often drifted into corners, disconnected from conversations, her eyes vacant even when her lips formed a practiced smile. Friends would later say that she carried an invisible weight, as if ghosts from her past clung to her, pulling her further into despair. Marilyn's therapists noted her desperate longing for stability, her craving to feel loved without condition. But no matter how much she achieved, it was never enough to silence the child inside her who had been abandoned so many times. Depression was not simply an illness for her. It was the shadow of her earliest wounds, magnified by fame and exploitation. And the cruelest truth was this: the more the world adored Marilyn Monroe, the more isolated Norma Jean felt. The spotlight that had once promised salvation now only illuminated her suffering, leaving her with nowhere to hide. As Marilyn's depression deepened, she sought solace in powerful men who seemed untouchable, men who could make her feel, if only for a moment, that she mattered. Among them were the most powerful brothers in America, President John F. Kennedy, and Attorney General Robert Kennedy. What began as whispers in the shadows soon spiraled into one of the most controversial and dangerous entanglements of her life. Her connection to John F. Kennedy dazzled her at first. He was charming, magnetic, and carried the aura of authority she had always gravitated toward. When she famously sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" in 1962, her sultry performance in a skin-tight gown lit the fuse of public speculation. To the world, it was a scandalous gesture. To Marilyn, it was a dangerous declaration of intimacy in plain sight. But John was not a man of fidelity. To him, Marilyn was a fleeting indulgence, a glamorous distraction from the pressures of the presidency. The deeper she fell, the more she realized how disposable she was to him, just as she had been to so many others before. When that realization crushed her, whispers suggested she turned her attention toward Robert Kennedy, seeking in him the tenderness John had denied. The rumors of her involvement with both brothers grew so loud they could no longer be ignored. There were suggestions of late-night phone calls, secret meetings, and even diary entries hinting at truths too dangerous to reveal. Some claimed she confided in friends that she knew secrets about the Kennedys, secrets involving politics, affairs, and national security. Whether true or exaggerated, such claims positioned her not just as a star in crisis, but as a liability to men whose reputations and power could not afford exposure. For Marilyn, the affair blurred the line between passion and peril. She had spent her life longing to be loved, but in reaching for the most powerful men in America, she unknowingly stepped into a storm of politics, secrecy, and danger. And within months, that storm would collide with her tragic fate. On the evening of the 4th of August, 1962, Marilyn Monroe retreated to her Brentwood home in Los Angeles, a quiet Spanish-style house that seemed almost too modest for Hollywood's brightest star. She had spent the day on the phone with friends, her mood swinging between moments of forced cheer and deep despair. Her housekeeper noticed the familiar signs, the scattered pill bottles, the empty glasses of champagne, the fragile woman clinging to the edge of control. As night fell, Marilyn locked herself in her bedroom. Hours passed in silence. When her housekeeper grew alarmed, she tried to knock, but there was no response. The door was locked from the inside. Sometime after midnight, the police arrived and forced entry. What they found would shock the world. Marilyn Monroe, lying lifeless on her bed, a phone in her hand, and an empty bottle of barbiturates on the nightstand. She was only 36 years old. The official report was swift: probable suicide. Newspapers splashed the headlines across their front pages, mourning the golden girl who had succumbed to despair. Fans wept in the streets, unable to believe that the woman who embodied beauty and vitality had slipped away so suddenly. But almost immediately, questions began to swirl. Why had she been on the phone that night, calling friends and associates, sounding distressed yet not entirely hopeless? Why were there inconsistencies in the police reports, contradictions about who entered the room first and what they saw? Why had her phone records mysteriously disappeared? Her death was not just a tragedy, it was the spark of a mystery. For many, the idea that Marilyn had simply taken her own life felt incomplete, even unconvincing. Something about that night didn't add up, and the more people probed, the more her final hours seemed to vanish into a fog of secrecy. That night did not just end the life of Marilyn Monroe, it ignited decades of speculation, suspicion, and the haunting sense that Hollywood's brightest star may not have died by her own hand. The morning after Marilyn's death, the world awoke to shock, grief, and suspicion. The official verdict of probable suicide was meant to close the case, but instead, it opened a floodgate of questions that have never been silenced. Almost instantly, whispers of conspiracy surrounded her name, turning her final hours into one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. One theory pointed directly to the Kennedys. Some believed Marilyn had become too entangled with John and Robert Kennedy, that she knew secrets too explosive to reveal conversations about politics, national security, even affairs of state that could have destroyed their reputations. To these theorists, her death was not an accident, but an elimination, a silencing of a woman who had seen too much. Others suspected the FBI and CIA. Documents later revealed that Marilyn had been under surveillance, her phone tapped, her activities monitored. She was linked to men of influence, and during the Cold War, even whispers of intimacy with powerful figures were considered dangerous. Was she silenced not for what she had done, but for what she might reveal? Even the circumstances in her home fueled speculation. Some witnesses described pill bottles, neatly arranged, too perfect for an overdose scene. Others questioned why there was no water in the room to swallow the dozens of capsules she was said to have taken. The conflicting reports about who discovered her body first, her psychiatrist, her housekeeper, or others, only deepened the mystery. And then there was her diary, rumored to contain names, dates, and private details about her affairs with powerful men. Some claimed it vanished after her death, never to be seen again. Was it stolen, hidden, or destroyed? To this day, no one knows for certain. For millions, the idea that Marilyn Monroe, Hollywood's ultimate fantasy, had died alone, and by her own choice felt unbearable. It was easier, perhaps, to believe she was the victim of a grand conspiracy, her death woven into the dark tapestry of politics, power, and betrayal. What is undeniable is this: her death did not end her story. It only transformed her into a legend, a symbol of beauty, tragedy, and secrets that the world still struggles to uncover. Though her life ended abruptly at just 36, Marilyn Monroe never truly left the stage. In many ways, her death immortalized her. The image of Marilyn, the platinum hair, the red lips, the breathy laugh froze in time, untouched by age or decline. Unlike other stars who faded with years, Marilyn remained forever young, forever radiant, forever the dream that Hollywood had promised. Her films became more than entertainment. They became relics of a lost goddess. Every screening of Some Like It Hot or Gentlemen Prefer Blondes felt like a resurrection, a chance to see her alive again, shimmering in motion as if time itself had bent to her charm. Photographs of her, once printed in tabloids, transformed into art, framed on walls, studied by generations who had never even lived during her lifetime. But her immortality was not only about beauty. Marilyn became a symbol of vulnerability, of the cost of fame, of the fragility behind the mask of perfection. Artists, writers, and musicians drew inspiration from her story, finding in her not just a muse but a mirror of the human condition, the longing to be loved, the pain of being misunderstood, and the devastating price of being adored by the world but abandoned in private. Even decades later, tributes pour in. Candlelight vigils at her grave in Westwood Cemetery draw crowds every year, fans leaving flowers as if time never moved. Fashion houses recreate her iconic looks. Singers channel her breathy style, and filmmakers continue to dissect her life, each seeking the secret of what made Marilyn Monroe endure when so many others have been forgotten. Marilyn did not simply belong to her own generation, she belongs to history. Like Cleopatra or Helen of Troy, her name has become shorthand for beauty and tragedy, forever etched into cultural memory. She may have been born Norma Jean, but in death she became something larger, an immortal myth, the eternal goddess of Hollywood. To the world, Marilyn Monroe's smile was pure magic, radiant, seductive, unforgettable. It lit up red carpets, disarmed audiences, and became one of the most recognizable expressions in human history. But behind that smile was a truth so much darker. It was not a reflection of happiness, but a mask carefully crafted to survive. Marilyn had learned from childhood that a smile could protect her, that it could hide the fear of abandonment, the ache of loneliness, the wounds no one cared to see. On screen, her grin promised joy and desire. Off-screen, it concealed exhaustion, heartbreak, and despair. Those who knew her best often said her laughter carried a shadow, as if she were always performing even in private moments. Her death forced the world to confront that contradiction. How could the woman who seemed to have everything, beauty, fame, adoration, be so broken inside? The answer lies in the very system that created her. Hollywood built Marilyn Monroe into a fantasy, then consumed her when she could no longer sustain it. The smile everyone adored was, in truth, her shield against a world that demanded perfection but offered little love. And yet, that same smile has endured, etched into history, reminding us of the fragility hidden behind the brightest lights. Marilyn's story is not just about a glamorous starlet, but about a woman who wanted, above all else, to be seen and cherished for who she truly was. The tragedy of Marilyn Monroe is that the world never gave her that gift in life. But in death, her legacy has become a cautionary tale, a reminder that behind every dazzling smile, there may be a story of unbearable pain. And that is the truth Marilyn took to the grave.